Hello guys. The translation of this story into proper English caused ChatGPT to crash 3 times because of the apparent forbidden information it contains. So without further ado, this is a message to all international truth seekers. I will keep this message as brief as possible, but I believe my personal experience and the things I have come to realize as a result could be a huge clue as to where we should be looking regarding the hidden hands in our society. Since 2019, I have been a targeted individual after my Dutch Facebook page, The Haan or The Rooster, became the #1 platform for truth seekers in the Netherlands. This is why I have a black helicopter as a logo, as I am not crazy and have these things constantly flying over my house ever since. After countless failed infiltrations by government agents, whom I always refer to as the cult members, I became aware of a secret and very large organization that was literally outside of the system and seems to have all controls here in the Netherlands. So at least it seems. But this whole situation triggered me and became part of my own quest for truth, and now has become one of my missions to map out and expose this cult. So here's an overview of what I have discovered so far and what I think is relevant for all of you to know. I have found many of these cult members around me to come from the provinces of Friesland and Groningen here in the Netherlands, as well as the cities of Rotterdam, The Hague and Amsterdam. Even from a small country as the Netherlands, it seems the whole world can be controlled. Our Dutch history is full of compulsive monopolies, and there's a lot of telling connections to be made with these cities and provinces. For example, until recently the port of Rotterdam has been the largest port in the world for an eternity, and still today 85% of all global transport goes through this port. Amsterdam is of course the place where it all began with the founding of the Dutch East India Company, which was the richest company ever to have operated in history, even by today's standards, with all-encompassing monopolies and the establishment of the all-encompassing stock market worldwide. The first controlled stock market crash, of course, which robbed the entire world at that time, happened not much later. The original investors of the Dutch East India Company came from the aforementioned cities and provinces. New Amsterdam eventually became New York, but the all-encompassing Wall Street in New York has had the same location in the heart of what was formerly known as New Amsterdam all this time. The recently deceased Queen of England was originally a simple girl from Friesland. The Queen of England owns 20% of all land on Earth. The main server of the Ukraine is located in Amsterdam. The whole world is of course a large controlled maritime trade agreement full of patents, and in which we humans are also commodities, or rather livestock. And today we can conclude that the entire world trade is to a certain extent completely controlled and dependent of and by the creation and supply of very advanced chips. There's only one company in the world that can make these chips, and only one company in the world that has been licensed to do so. By now, you can probably guess in which provinces this company is located. But these are just some crazy facts to tell, but eventually, through the information in a vlog by Campbell from Oera Didactic, I became aware of the Island of Frisland, which has disappeared from all maps since the 1600s. I had never heard of this island, which is remarkable because I had many Frisians around me, and they are a very proud people that even have their own language. The Frisians have a long history and were already there before the Netherlands even existed. However, They had never told me about this island or its history and its inhabitants. I started talking about this Frisian discovery with enthusiasm, which caused a remarkable reaction. It was all not true, and it never happened. Despite being found on famous world maps by famous cartographers, it was all a mythology. However, I already had several years of experience with the many deceptions that these Frisians tell us, and this statement was just a particularly bad one. Not long after, I also became aware of the Oera Linda Book, an ancient Frisian manuscript from the early Middle Ages, which is a family history told by generation to generation, dating back to even Roman and Greek times. It tells a detailed story about the culture of this Frisian people, which are great seafarers and also the first people to apparently walk the earth since the beginning of time. Before I started talking about the Island of Frisland or the Oera Linda Book here in the Netherlands, there was no content about this at all. So my own content became actively added to this mythological subject, and I also noticed that I was being shadow banned because of this. But since then, countless videos have appeared from these provinces that had to set some kind of alternative truth about Friesland and the Oera Linda Book against mine, because the crazy truth that the Haan, of course, is discovering cannot be discovered or true and should be fought against or battled against. There are many significant claims or links to be made about significant events in our world history that indicate a hidden Frisian influence. The Frisians were the barbarians, the Normans, the Vikings, the VOC or East India Company. They were the pagans, the Druids, the Nazis, the Thule Society during the Second World War, and Thule being the other mythical island next to Friesland, which also, of course, never existed. But also things like Christmas and many other Christian holidays or celebrations are old Frisian rituals. Apollo, Neptune and many other ancient sages can all be traced back to have a Frisian origin, even Jesus Christ. Christmas, which is a corruption of St. Nicholas or Sinterklaas, which was compulsively introduced during the time of New Amsterdam, and Sinterklaas, which is again a corruption of an ancient Frisian pagan ritual. The days of the week are named after old Frisian rituals or gods, with Friday being the most significant, as the Frisians believe they are descended from Freya, the daughter of Vralda, the god who created the world. However, Sunday or Monday are also very important or significant, referring to the sun and moon, which are featured heavily in their rituals. There's also much more to be linked regarding secret societies, Satanism or Freemasonry with this Frisian. The reason I made this video is the following. I may see a hidden Frisian influence behind the entire world stage. I could never really prove it or make it tangible until recently, except then by speaking my own thoughts. The first personal discovery I made regarding this Frisian was the fact that the city of Amsterdam has engraved this mythological island as a work of art in the floor of perhaps the most important and oldest building in Amsterdam, the Old Palace on the Dam. This provided the first confirmation of my claim that the island still exists. The second significant clue came yesterday in a vlog by Jay Widener. In this video he talks about a great seafaring nation or people called the Phoenicians or Phoenicians, and where the same qualities and characteristics emerged that I previously had identified to be my hidden Frisians. In my view, these Phoenicians turned out to be like a cover story for the Frisian cult, and with it the Frisians wrote themselves out of history and hid their hidden influence even better. But then, miraculously, after I made that video in that context, the following video appeared on my timeline.
In 1580, John Dee, advisor to Queen Elizabeth, claimed the island of Frisland for the English crown. The island would be a splendid addition for the crown in the Atlantic, but there's just one problem. Frisland doesn't exist. The story of this mysterious island begins in 1558, when Niccolo Xeno announced to the world he had unearthed, in a storeroom in his family home in Venice, a map and accompanying letters dating from around the year 1400. His discovery described a long voyage made by his ancestors in the 1390s. On this voyage, he claimed that his ancestors, Niccolo the Elder and Antonio, had discovered an island south of Iceland that they named Frisland. Not to be confused with Friesland, the province and islands in the Netherlands that has the adorable hearts, water lilies, on its flag. Anyway, on what would become known as the Xeno Map, Frisland is seen as a rectangular island dotted with Italian-sounding place names, located south of Iceland, west of Norway, and east of a place called Estoniland. It was a great legacy for his family and for Venice, not only for Frisland, but also for Estoniland, which was perhaps an even more impressive discovery. It was, after all, the New World, been discovered a century before Columbus had claimed that prize. In its day, this was generally believed to be a true account, and another version of the map was published by a fellow Venetian a few years later. So, given the common knowledge status of the island around this time, it's possibly understandable that the English navigator, explorer and privateer Martin Frobisher mistook Greenland for Frisland during his transatlantic voyages as he looked for the Northwest Passage. Granted, he also returned to England with 200 tons of gold ore on his second voyage and 1,350 tons on his third, which, after years of smelting, turned out to be iron pyrite, worthless fool's gold, so the accuracy of this man's observation skills were perhaps a little suspect. Regardless, Dee claimed the island for his queen, and Frisland would be placed on virtually all maps of the North Atlantic for a century. Even world-renowned cartographer Gerardus Mercator, the one who gave us the ever-loved Mercator projection, included the island on his 1569 world map. But Xeno's story, of course, was a forgery, concocted based on the real voyages of other 16th century navigators. But as a work of self-promotion, it was also a masterpiece. It cemented the Xeno name in history for over 5 centuries by offering its reader a pleasing tale of rich, untouched lands just waiting for colonization.
So again, what is this video telling us? In the archives of one of the world-famous Venetian explorers in the history of mankind, this guy found a map of Friesland, the island, so went on to discover and describe these islands. So because of the Xeno brothers, it appeared on maps for a century, and with that eventually established themselves successfully as important explorers in world history, which had lasted 500 years before it was deemed untrue. And this is because of the fact that the advanced modern time English Navy has now mapped the area and determined that it was all untrue and not existing. This for me is the third clear denial of a pretty strong and documented story in history. It's not even slightly true, of course, they say. They are trying to make me believe that the Frisian influence does not exist at all, just like the island. This is mainly what they have been trying to make me believe ever since I discovered it. It of course tells me that I should never have discovered it in the first place. But the real hidden hands in our world come from the island of Frisland. And I would encourage you to investigate a possible Frisian link you have in your own research, because I'm telling you all, there is something here. Thank you for your attention.